All right, good evening again, everybody. Tuesday night as opposed to Monday night, and we're doing Parshat Tzav, which won't be the Parshat Shavua for this Shabbat because this Shabbat rather will, but then after that, the following Shemini will stretch out over a couple of weeks. So we'll figure out how to navigate our learning over the next couple of weeks. I think what we'll do is I think we will plan to still learn next Monday night, a few days before Pesach, but we won't learn on Chol HaMoed Pesach. We'll have a stretching out of Shemini. But this Parshat Tzav, we will learn this Shabbat, which will be Shabbat HaGadol. Rabbi Golden has a few different essays, as I mentioned, for most of the Parshiot Shavua. And I chose this one because it was a topic I've noticed from time to time, not a major theme, whereas last week with Vayikra we delved into the purpose and meaning of Korbanot. This time he really does a close reading of a Rashi and uses it to really, I think, show both how to read Rashi closely, how subsequent commentaries engage with Rashi and what Rashi's quoting, and draws out, I think, a lovely message. So it's kind of in between Parshanut and Drasha, and a little bit shorter than some of our prior essays, and we'll jump right in. He titles this chapter, or this essay, Urgent Business, and opens up in the gray box with the opening section, which he calls context. We'll get used to this structure, context, questions, approaches, and then after all of that, we have a section called Points to Ponder, where he draws often from his personal rabbinic experience and tries to apply to the present day most of all. So here we go. Context. Parshat Tzav opens with a linguistic phenomenon that appears periodically in the biblical text. In place of the normative divine directive daber, right, we have so often by Daber Hashem Moshe Lemor, Daber el Bnei Yisrael, God spoke to Moshe saying, speak to the children of Israel and tell them. And in place of that normative divine directive, God's instructions to Moshe begin with the term Tzav, Tzav et Aharon vet banav, command Aharon and his sons. Everything here is in English, with the exception of the occasional little transliterated sections. You have the essay in your inboxes. Hopefully most of you are getting the class emails. If you're not, please do let me know. We'll try to add you to the list. Lainey, hopefully you got added. If for those who have the facility and are interested, the sources that Rabbi Golden quotes, he usually cites the particular location in the footnotes, and you could go on to Sefaria or open up a Mikraot Gedolot sometimes and see some of the sources in the original that he quotes, but he gives us usually a synopsis or an excerpted translation. So the questions. When and why does the Torah substitute the commandment Tzav, command, for the more common directive Daber, speak? Does this change connote particular contextual urgency or significance? Right? Because you would imagine if instead of speak to, we're saying charge, command, it does give some sense that there's a greater urgency or importance, perhaps. Why does the substitution specifically occur at the beginning of Parshat Tzav, as God outlined the role of the priests in the sacrificial rite? Here are our approaches. Referencing a midrash in his first comment on the Parsha, that's what makes it a famous Rashi, because first Rashis are often more well-known or frequently quoted. Rashi quotes the rules that, according to rabbinic tradition, determine the use of the term Tzav in the Torah text. Tzav, this is a quote of Rashi, Tzav is used only in cases of urgency, immediacy, and continuity, when the commandment applies intergenerationally. And then Rashi continues and says, Rabbi Shimon maintains, the Torah must convey specific urgency in cases of financial loss, b'makom sheyesh bo chisaron kis, in places where there is literally a lacking in your pocket, financial loss. Okay, so Tzav is used only in cases of urgency, immediacy, and continuity. And then Rabbi Shimon, the Torah must convey specific urgency, meaning use the term Tzav in cases of financial loss. So ostensibly we have our answer, but as Rabbi Golden points out, these rules, however, remain open to interpretation. How do these different things relate? Must all three rabbinically proposed criteria, urgency, immediacy, and continuity, be present for the word Tzav to be used in the text? Or does the term appear even if only one condition is present? And what's the meaning of Rabbi Shimon's interjection? Does he reject the criteria suggested by his colleagues? Or is he noting an additional requisite condition for the biblical use of the term Tzav? Or that's a classic question when you have one opinion and then the second opinion, and they're not obviously arguing with each other. Not obviously, they're not diametrically opposed, they're not mutually exclusive. Then we ask the question, is the second opinion adding on to the first or replacing, proposing an alternative to the first? Okay, Rabbi Yehuda Nachshoni delineates a distinction between the use of the verb litzavot, to command, within the context of a narrative tale in the biblical text, and the use of the verb as an introduction to a divine commandment. For the verb to appear in a narrative, only one of the rabbinic conditions need be present. For example, Vaitzav Paro l'chol amo. Paro commanded his entire nation, right? There we have the use of the verb in a story, Vaitzav, commanded, and in that instance, it seems, we only have the urgency, not the immediacy. It didn't have to necessarily happen that instant, and not the constancy. This wasn't a multi-generational command, but it was, it was time sensitive, and it was of great urgency. So there, in a narrative, in a story context, not a legal context, Vaitzav could be used when any one of these criteria is met. But when it is in a legal context, rather, a divine commandment, then it requires all three. That's Rabbi Nachshoni's argument. And before I come to James, just note in the footnote, you may know these as the green volumes, Hagot, or I would have thought maybe Hagut, Beparshiot HaShavua, Beparshiot HaTorah. These are late 20th century wonderful thinker and Parshat Shavua author, Rabbi Yehuda Nachshoni, that he's quoting from here. Yeah, James?
How do you understand the difference between immediacy and urgency?
Yeah, it's tricky. It's not totally clear, and I thought it's best to try to open up the Rashi in Hebrew, and I think I have my Chumash right here. One second. So that Rashi, quoting the Midrash, says, Ein Tzav ela lashon zeruz, miyad uledorot. We could even argue exactly on whether these are three different criteria or not. It's a sort of a very maximalist reading that interprets it that way. So zeruz means, hurry up, have a say. I mean, urgency is a good translation. Miyad is immediately, right? So how do you differentiate between urgency and immediacy? I think immediacy means do it right now, and urgency somehow communicates a sense of importance and time sensitivity without immediacy. So, of course, you could say, please do this right away. It's not a big deal. It just needs to be done right now. And you could say, this is really, really important, and I need you to make sure this happens today. You could do it in a few hours, but you need to make sure it happens today because it's really important and time sensitive, right? So the first one is immediacy, and the second one in my examples is urgency. That's, I think, the best articulation I could give for it. And again, it seems to me possible to argue that Zeruz miyad uledorot really just means urgency, not just now, but also for the generations, such that miyad is not its own thing, immediacy. It's really just two things. Urgency, both in the present moment and for generations, FOR, for generations. But Rabbi Golden is arguing that it's three different criteria. Okay. And so we have Rabbi Yehuda Nachshoni's take, which is that, in a story, when the verb is used, it only necessarily has one of the criteria. But in a narrative, so I keep getting that, in a legal context, when it's a command in a legal context for a law, it requires all three. Now we still have not incorporated Rabbi Shimon. That's what we're going to do next. A wide-ranging debate emerges in rabbinic literature. Now you may already have in the back of your head, like, okay, why are these laws worthy of this urgency as opposed to any other laws? He's going to get to that. So that's the right next question to be asking, but we have to get there. A wide-ranging debate emerges in rabbinic literature concerning Rabbi Shimon's enigmatic declaration: the Torah must convey specific urgency in cases of financial loss. The Ramban, for example, postulates that Rabbi Shimon is suggesting an alternative to the three criteria proposed by his colleagues. The term Tzav is used at times in cases of financial loss, even when the other conditions are absent. On these occasions, through the language of commandment, the Torah encourages the unhesitating performance of a particular action in spite of the associated cost. Right? So, saying essentially, the Ramban seems to be saying, Rabbi Shimon might be saying that the Torah uses Tzav for something that is not multi-generational, it's not extremely, of extremely great time sensitivity / importance, and it's also not something that, whether or not so important, still needs to be done right away. It could just be a mitzvah that has to get done sometime, and it's not even necessarily the most important mitzvah, whatever that means. It's just a costly mitzvah, and therefore we use Tzav because we understand that you're going to have some hesitation in doing it whenever it comes due, because it's expensive. And therefore, the special Tzav charge is utilized in those cases. At the opposite end of the spectrum, Rabbi Eliyahu Mizrahi, that's one of the super commentaries on Rashi, maintains that Rabbi Shimon proposes an additional requisite condition. The term Tzav will only be used, according to Rabbi Shimon, according to Rabbi Eliyahu Mizrahi, when the situation reflects urgency, immediacy, continuity, and financial loss. Okay, so we got the background. Now we're going to apply it to our Parsha. Turning to our Parsha, we can easily see how its dramatic opening scene satisfies the first three rabbinic conditions for the use of the term Tzav. As God instructs Moshe to prepare his brother Aharon for the priesthood, God underscores the significance of this moment, right? We see a series of commands in Parshat Tzav, but basically what Tzav describes goes back through many of the same korbanot that we saw in Parshat Vayikra, but it emphasizes the priestly responsibilities vis-a-vis those korbanot, whereas Parshat Vayikra was much more from the perspective of the person who would be bringing them. Parshat Tzav kind of retells the story of a variety of korbanot from the perspective of what were the priestly responsibilities and eligibilities or gifts that were received from those korbanot. And then the second part of the parsha begins the process of actually inaugurating Aharon and his sons as the Kohanim over the first 7 days of what winds up being an 8-day inauguration ritual, either starting around the 25th of Adar and culminating on the 1st of Nisan, or starting on the 1st of Nisan, culminating on the 8th of Nisan. Okay, so that's what's happening in the Parsha. That's what's being introduced by Tzav. Instruct Aharon and his sons, charge Aharon and his sons about what their priestly responsibilities will be for the various sacrifices and about the actual inauguration of their priesthood. And so Rabbi Golden dramatizes for us what underlies that Tzav. Tzav, do not hesitate, Moshe. Not a moment is to be lost. The time has come to take the next step in your nation's development through the launching of the priesthood. For all time, Aharon and his descendants will serve as representatives of the people in my sanctified worship. Their singular participation will bring the hopes and strivings of the nation before me, and their teaching will convey to the people my dreams for them. Okay, this is an expanded vision of the priesthood in which the Kohanim are also the teachers. That's certainly described in some places in Tanakh and in rabbinic literature, less so in this parsha. But if we spin a broad tapestry here, we could include that idea. Move quickly and urgently, Moshe, to inaugurate a priestly role that will span the generations, right? So we have the immediacy, the urgency, and the continuity being described here. I think it's just a lovely, dramatization by Rabbi Golden, and spells out for us the first opinion in Rashi. On the other hand, Rabbi Shimon's position would seem more difficult to defend in the case before us. What monetary loss confronts Aharon and his sons in the fulfillment of their priestly duties? On the contrary, as indicated before, the Kohanim benefit materially from the sacrificial rite. So, some scholars accept the inapplicability of Rabbi Shimon's approach to the opening scene of Parshat Tzav. The Ramban, for example, begins his interpretation of the Parsha by declaring, the teaching of Rabbi Shimon does not apply to this commandment. The children of Aharon, the subjects of the decree, suffer no financial loss. On the contrary, they receive benefit from all the sacrifices. Right? So first, great, James suggesting maybe Moshe's missing out. Excellent suggestion, and we will see Rabbi Golden suggest that a little bit later on. So Baruch Shekivanta, great. So the Ramban is pointing out to us, when Rashi quotes these two opinions, Rashi's sort of saying to you, hey, you see the word Tzav, that introduces, a variety of different contexts. I'm giving you the general parameters, but they don't all apply here. The Rabbi Shimon case is not, does not seem to be relevant here, but Rashi's setting you up for future occurrences of Tzav that you might see. But financial loss, not relevant in this case. The Kohanim have all kinds of material gains from the Korbanot. Many authorities, however, are unwilling to summarily read Rabbi Shimon's approach out of the Parsha, right? You might say, okay, if he's not relevant here, why does Rashi even quote him here? The next time we have a tzav that is related to financial loss, quote Rabbi Shimon there. By including his opinion here, it would make more sense for this to be a case that his opinion addresses. So is there financial loss here? So the Ramban himself, in spite of his initial declaration, entertains the possibility that, through the commandment of Tzav, the Torah references the personal korbanot of Aharon and his children, which must be offered from their own possessions. Right? For example, on Yom Kippur, Aharon and his family bring personal sacrifices, which they are required to bring by virtue of being the high priest and the priestly family. So the Torah, by inaugurating them as priests, is putting them on the hook at some periods of time to make mandatory contributions. Maybe that's the reference the Ramban suggests. Chizkuni, for his part, explains that the risk of financial loss runs throughout the entire sacrificial rite. A priest's failure to execute the temple rituals properly, this sage maintains, can invalidate a specific korban and create the need for a replacement offering. So that's another possibility, right? There's financial loss, not necessarily that the priest automatically incurs, but that the priestly project can incorporate. The Maharal envisions an even more pervasive loss emerging for the Kohen as a result of his general ritual obligations. The demands placed upon the Kohen's time by his service within the temple force him to set aside more lucrative worldly pursuits. Right? There's an opportunity cost to being conscripted into the kahuna. You don't have a chance to become a doctor or a lawyer and earn more money as a result. Right? So and in that sense, offering the tzav as we begin the description of the priestly duties more broadly makes sense, because the whole institution of the priesthood means that you don't have the chance to choose a more lucrative profession. The Levush Ha'orah, that's another Rashi super commentary, creatively interweaves concern for all participants in the ritual. The korbanot cited at the beginning of the parsha, he says, carry no clear material benefit at all for the owners, that is, the Israelites bringing the korban. These sacrifices are olot, right? The very, very beginning of the parsha opens, Savat Aaron vet banav lemor zot Torah ta'olah. The first sacrifice mentioned in the parsha is the olah. burnt offerings consumed entirely on the altar, and as free will offerings do not even grant atonement for sin. Moved by a spirit of generosity, the Israelites are willing to offer korbanot which result in concrete loss with no materially measurable gain. The Torah, therefore, urges alacrity on the part of the Kohanim, lest the priests hesitate and give the owners a chance to reconsider their generous gesture. Right? So now we understand precisely what, according to the Levush HaOrah, what Rabbi Shimon is saying. He's saying the priests are charged to be, to have alacrity, to have, ongoing urgency and immediacy in their priestly service, because the priestly service is filled with situations where people, out of the generosity of their hearts, are going to incur financial loss to offer offerings. And if you don't jump at the opportunity and give them a chance to reconsider, maybe they'll take it back. It's be zealous, be immediate, and act with urgency in matters that have potential financial loss for others, so that you can meet them before they withdraw the offer. Again, is that such a frequent scenario that we could really imagine? Not necessarily. But it's a creative interpretation, and again, what we see is a couple of exegetical priorities or instincts that are intersecting here. First is the question: how do you view Rabbi Shimon? Is he necessarily relevant to these instances or not? If you think he is relevant to these instances, where do you find the chisaron kis? Where do you find the financial loss in the institution of korbanot? Is it the priests? Is it the people bringing the offerings, etc.? Now to James's suggestion. Finally, an entirely different, powerfully poignant approach to the issue of loss at the beginning of Parshat Tzav can be discerned through a slight shift in perspective. Perhaps it's not Aharon, but his brother Moshe, who confronts the issue of loss at this pivotal juncture. Parshat Tzav marks the final stages of Aharon's journey towards the priesthood. This journey, which began at the burning bush with Aharon's designation to leadership alongside his brother, right? Aaron achicha yeh neviecha. Aaron, your brother, will be your mouthpiece, your speaker. And of course, there are opinions that Aharon was already leading the people when Moshe arrived. But this journey, which began at the burning bush with Aharon's designation to leadership alongside his brother, was most clearly defined by the appointment of Aharon and his progeny to the kahuna in Parshat Tzav. He's going to come back to that point as well. Theory, right? That's when Moshe is told, charge Aharon and his sons, with various responsibilities. That's the beginning of Moshe finding out about the priesthood, but that's all theoretical. Theory, however, only becomes practice at the beginning of Parshat Tzav, when God sets into motion the steps that will define Aharon's role as a Kohen and inaugurate him and his progeny into that role. Questions we have raised before, unfortunately we haven't seen them because we didn't do Shemot with Rabbi Golden, but see Shemot Tzav at 2. Therefore, now return with a vengeance. Was Moshe, as some scholars suggest, originally designated to be the Kohen Gadol, only to lose that honor due to his continued reluctance at the burning bush? That's one opinion in the Talmud. If so, does Moshe regret that loss now, as Aharon prepares in earnest to assume his eternal role? Even if Moshe was never designated for the priesthood, as others maintain, the other side of that debate in the Talmud, does he nonetheless envy his brother when the kahuna becomes a reality? As we have previously noted, conflicting midrashic traditions hint at possible divergent emotions that may have coursed through Moshe's heart. Right? We have a lot of different takes on this. One of the famous points is that when, I think it's in Parshat Shmini, if I remember right, though it could be in Tzav, but I think it's in Shmini, when Moshe is kind of slaughtering the final offerings that conclude the inauguration process. I think it's the word vayishchat, and he's slaughtered, that has a shalshelet on it, that very dramatic, triple rise and fall trup, which in its kind of cadence has a sense of vacillation or hesitation. And many have suggested that each time a shalshelet appears in the Torah, it is hinting to a moment of ambivalence, indecisiveness, vacillation, hesitation. And some have suggested that Vayishchat, which, why would Moshe be hesitating to slaughter an offering, is because he's coming close to the kind of climax of the inauguration of Aharon, and he has his misgivings, his hesitations, his ambivalence about kind of relinquishing that role in its entirety. So there's much to support this idea. And so Rabbi Golden continues, with good reason, therefore, God urges Moshe, Tzav et Aharon vet banav, command Aaron and his sons. And now in, again, dramatized subtext. Moshe, the time has come to demonstrate true leadership by relinquishing a portion of your power. Command your brother, do not hesitate. As I have taught you before, in conjunction with your brother's role, greatness lies in taking a step back and allowing others to shine. Now, on this take, I don't think he totally clarifies. Rabbi Shimon says chisaron kis. That's really classically interpreted as financial loss. Here it seems more like a sense of emotional loss. Maybe to go back to the original point, it's financial loss if you take the approach that the priesthood does actually have financial benefit, right, which we kind of pushed against that in trying to suggest, why this could apply to Aharon. Where would there be financial loss in the priesthood? But if you take the approach that the priesthood has financial benefit, then for Moshe, charging Aharon into the priesthood and cementing his own departure from that role, even if he didn't have a choice, still was a moment of his incurring financial loss. Otherwise, we'd have to interpret chisaron kis a little bit more broadly, as it seems like Rabbi Golden is doing, just to say, the loss of something we hold, right, in our pockets is more than just our money, but it's our, we carry in our pockets whatever sense of identity, identification, etc. And so Moshe has a loss of a sense of who he is or who he could be in handing off the priesthood. There's a chisaron for him there, and therefore he's the one who needs the urging, urging the immediacy. Just do it now, do it because it's important, and timely, and do it knowing that it's going to be, an ongoing change. How telling, Rabbi Golden concludes, that both the Parsha that predicts Aharon's ascension to the priesthood, Tzav, and the Parsha that marks his last steps towards that goal, Tzav, are characterized by the verb litzavot, right, to charge or command. On both occasions, God commands Moshe to act with alacrity as he meets the difficult challenge of achieving greatness through personal retreat. Again, here he's focused on that last interpretation, the one that he offered in suggesting what's going on here. Okay, we'll do the points to ponder and then come back for thoughts and comments. But let me just pause here to summarize, at least, or interrupt here to summarize that our question was, what's the significance of this term tzav at the beginning of the parsha? That our focal text is Rashi quoting a midrash with two approaches. That tzav means zeruz miyad ulidorot, which Rabbi Golden wanted to suggest means three things: sense of urgency, sense of immediacy, and a sense of continuity. And then the second opinion, Rabbi Shimon, that tzav appears, as opposed to just speaking or instructing, that commanding or charging appears in situations where there is financial loss. We saw different opinions on whether, first of all, are all three criteria in the first opinion necessary. We saw the idea that in a story you only need one, but in a legal context you need all three for tzav to be used, which kind of makes sense because everything's a mitzvah in a legal context. So for a mitzvah to merit the use of the verb tzav, it must have much more specific parameters, i.e. all three. Whereas in a narrative context, commanding is already different than lots of other things that we would do, and therefore maybe it doesn't need as much, as much specific case to warrant the use of the term. Then we talked about the relationship of Rabbi Shimon, the financial loss to the first opinion with the other three parameters, and are they alternatives, or are all of them, all four really required together? And then we came back to explore the question of what is the financial loss? Is it something that the priests incur because of opportunity cost or because of their own personal obligations to bring sacrifices? Is it something that the people bringing the offerings, are making a commitment, and therefore the priests need to jump to receive it before people might potentially change their mind, especially for an olah, which doesn't confer any, material benefit or spiritual atonement back to the to the offerer. So it's truly just of the generosity of their heart, and therefore the Kohanim need to grab it before the bringers change their mind. And then we really dove into the question of Rabbi Golden's suggestion that the loss might be something which Moshe is incurring in this moment of leadership transition, and that's just a hard thing to do. And therefore God is charging him to really push himself, to jump at the opportunity, to do it now, and to recognize that this is a long-term change. So a lot comes out of that one Rashi, that one Midrash, and allows us to broaden our perspective on what are the costs of the system of Korbanot, and what's happening in this narrative moment in the Torah. And now, points to ponder. Our suggestion that the use of the commandment Tzav at the Parshah's opening may indicate potential loss on Moshe's part rather than on Aharon's underscores the value of attempting to perform an ultimately impossible life exercise, the endeavor to see the world through someone else's eyes. Years of experience in the rabbinate have convinced me that we each live in our own worlds that are the product of our unique experience, our individual perspective, and our personal predilections. None of us perceives absolute truth because each of us is looking through a subjective prism. The most that each of us can hope for and work towards is that our own world remain as close as possible to the real world. By the way, just as an aside, very, very far aside, but this just made me think of it. Rav Melamed, in his Peninei Halacha on the laws of truth-telling, talks about, even if arguably halacha, there are situations where, white lies are not really, a violation of halacha, are not really, disallowed, that every time we do something that's not 100% honest, we create a reality that's separate from the reality of the real world, and that's a dangerous slippery slope or path to go on, because we only can function successfully in the world if we can be honest about what the world in front of us is. The more we create an artificial world, the more detached we become from the world, the harder it is to have meaningful relationships with people, with God, etc. And therefore, there's sort of a premium. Obviously, there's a premium on honesty. There's a premium on, really strong truth-telling. So just this comment made me think about that I think insightful comment of Rav Melamed. So the most that each of us can hope for and work towards is that our own world remain as close as possible to the real world. The greater the distance between these two entities, the more difficult life becomes. By recognizing that others legitimately see things differently than we do, we can often defuse or at least lessen the tension surrounding difficult situations. I am astounded, for example, by the widely different perceptions often firmly and honestly held by each of the parties in the tragic situation of a dissolving marriage. As each party describes what the marriage was like during the years of its existence, and the part they each played in the process, it quickly becomes clear that they have been living in vastly different worlds. The sooner they acknowledge the legitimate disparity between those worlds, the sooner they gain the ability to get on with their lives, whether together or apart. The critical events unfolding on Parshat Tzav are certainly experienced very differently by Aharon and Moshe. Perhaps the ability of these very dissimilar brothers to work together was, at least partially, founded on the respect each held for the other's world. Of course, here we see much more of Moshe, God charging Moshe to see the world through Aharon's eyes. We don't see quite the other side, which is there a way in which God is asking Aharon to see the world through Moshe's eyes? One might suggest in the beginning of Parshat Tzav, just thinking out loud now for a moment, in the beginning of Parshat Tzav, I think God tells Moshe to say to Aharon, Krav el hamizbeach v'aseh et chatatcha et olatecha. Quickly draw near to the altar and offer, your sin offering and your holy burnt offering. And the text there, the Midrash there talks about the fact that Aharon was hesitant to own the priesthood and to step into the priesthood because of the guilt that he carried about the sin of the golden calf. We could take a slightly different tack on that, on the impetus, but change the reason, and maybe try to suggest from here that Aharon was sensitive to the loss that Moshe was incurring or experiencing in that moment, and he was hesitant to leap forward into the priesthood because he knew in doing that Moshe was losing something that was precious to Moshe, and so God was telling Moshe, you got to tell Aharon to go forward, right? Our parsha is focusing on Moshe. You have to go ahead and relay these instructions to him, as hard as that is for you. But then the kind of almost flip side is God then telling Moshe to tell Aharon, you have to go ahead and do it, because we have a sense that Aharon might be hesitating, maybe also for the reason that he's sensitive to the impact of this transition on Moshe. We might have hints to the capacity of each of them to understand, what the other is going through, and to try to, have some sensitivity to that. Okay, I'll pause here for questions, comments, or reactions to this essay. Any thoughts? Lance,
hmm
great to see you.
Uh, I've been thinking about all this. Number one, I recall that God says the Kohanim are going to be in charge forever. No mention of rabbis. How could God say that? Is God lying?
It's a great question. Um, I mean, hmm,
Indeed. It's see, part of the problem that we have here, and I think you've been talking, and I'm saying what you're saying is absolutely brilliant, really. What the rabbis are saying is brilliant. No, what you're trying to do is you're trying to have a foreground which is completely understandable, completely illuminated. And that's what you and the rabbis and everybody's trying to do. Well, let's see. This person's thinking that, this person's thinking that. We don't know what Abraham is thinking really on his way to kill Isaac. We're not told. I mean, one of the problems, for example, with Renaissance drama is that people tend to project psychoanalysis and other forms of contemporary thought back onto a play where, in most cases, really the main thing that counts is the plot and the character, and even there, it's pretty thin. So my thinking here is a little. This just recall I got this sort of message a little earlier. What the if you think of the foreground and the background, the the Judaism is that is the Torah is really all about the background, and Greeks like the Odyssey is all about the fore. Now, this is an idea that Eric Auerbach has in Mimesis, but the point is that if you think about it, the rabbis are acting like Hellenized Jews.
hmm,
In other words, they're looking at things as through a Greek lens. I'm going to put it
interesting.
that way.
Interesting.
Whereas the Israelites have, I think, a different viewpoint. And you could argue that the big question here is who is the measure of all things? is it God or man?
Mm.
For the Greeks, it's clearly man. And Rabbi Riskin makes this point in one of his videos. And it is for the Israelites, the measure of all things is God. And, I think that we've lost that concept. I think that in a certain sense, we're all Hellenized Jews.
Fascinating. Fascinating. I don't have much to say about that. I'm still digesting, but I will just go back to the first thing you said and theorize this since it's not well thought through, that maybe what God means in the Torah about the eternal priesthood is that not that the priests will always be the leaders of the people, but that the priesthood will always be in the family of the priests, meaning the descendants of Aharon retain the role of Kohanim forever. What, you know, the and that's a hereditary transmission. What the role of the Kohanim will be may be subject to change in temple times and non-temple times, but the Kohanim will always be the Kohanim. But I don't know. God certainly knew that the destruction of the temples was going to come, and certainly the Torah talks about eras in which you'll be cast out of the land, etc., etc. So I think that's implied that there will be times when the Kohanim don't serve in their regular function, but when temples are restored, we snap back to the Kohanim in their leadership in that context.
One other point I'd like to make in that is if you think about the Samaritans, the Samaritan religion is Kohanic. The Kohanim, and there are no rabbis, the Kohanim run the whole religion, plus the Kohanim today, as far as I know, have diplomatic involvement between the Samaritans and other peoples. And there are people in Samaria named Cohen, which I thought was very interesting. And unfortunately, the rabbis hated the Samaritans. The Samaritans are considered third-class citizens. And if you look at the parable of the Good Samaritan, you will see that the Kohanim there are put in a very bad light. They see a dead body and they walk away from it because, well, they see the person's not really dead, but they see it, what they think is a dead body, and walk away because they don't want to be unclean, right? And the Good Samaritan comes, sees a dead body, and he immediately takes over. It's a live body. He takes to an inn, makes sure that the body's going to be, the person's going to be taken care of, pays money, says he's going to come back, all that stuff. And the irony is that the Samaritan's not good, according to the rabbis, right? But for me, the key is the Good Samaritan is doing a good deed simply to do it. There is no reward implicit in what he's doing. Chesed shel emet.
Beautiful. All right. Thank you. We're going to go to Lainey and then Rav Scott.
I want to go back to this idea of immediacy. So I could say, please set the table. Or I could say, company is coming at 5 o'clock. Please set the table. Or I could say, this whole week, it's going to be your job to set the table. And I think those are the three. That's a paradigm for those three things.
Yeah. It's, there's the whole, I think, is it Stephen Covey's, or the quadrants of urgent and important. And it doesn't feel like it exactly maps onto that. I think your description is closer to it. And it's hard to exactly distill these categories, but I think that's a nice summary or application of the three. Thank you. And thank you to James for raising just the question of how exactly do we discern between, if we're reading them as all three, what's the relationship between zeruz and miyad, between urgency and immediacy? Yeah. Rav Scott?
I really didn't think we were ever going to get to the Samaritans today, but
they come and visit.
But I have to ask, what's the origin of the Samaritans? Who are they? So, Lance, can you tell us who they were, where they
Okay.
come from, what's their
Yeah,
origin?
right. I think they were considered to be in the northern part of Judea, but the main thing is that they were in Assyria. And the Assyrians, I guess to some extent, caused them to be third class, second class citizens. And they tried to move them out of wherever they were. And I think my suspicion is, and again, I don't think there's much archaeological or historical evidence anywhere that really defines what truly happened to the Samaritans. But we know that they came from Assyria to Samaria in Israel, and we know, for example, that at some point, maybe 1,500 years ago, the Samaritans were observing Sukkot. They built their sukkahs outside their homes, and the sukkah became a target. And so the Samaritans went to the high priest then, and the high priest said, "Okay, from now on, you're putting the sukkah inside the home," which they do to this day. And of course, that's rabbis would never agree to that. But the point is that the Samaritans at one point had, I don't know, 1,000,005 people. Today, there are what, 800 Samaritans living in Samaria. They're mostly Holon. I think they're Holon and around Gerizim. And
So,
the other thing is, if you think about it, the Samaritans have access to Israel, to Jordan, and to the Palestinian Authority. And I think the only people in that area that have that kind of mobility. And the other thing is, and this is what I find hugely fascinating, we talk about the Paschal Lamb sacrifice. It's in Joshua, where, by the way, there's no mention of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. But the point is that today, right now, in this coming week, I guess, whenever Samaritans have their Pesach, they will sacrifice the Paschal Lamb. And the state of Israel will not permit rabbis who are trained, Kohanim trained there to do it on a Temple Mount. State of Israel will not permit that, but they don't care. They could care less about what the Samaritans are doing. And so the Samaritans are actually fulfilling and I believe this is another one of those forevers. Israelites must sacrifice the Paschal Lamb forever.
so what you're telling us is that the Samaritans were foreigners. Yes?
No, I
They,
don't think so. No, I'd have to do a little more research on that, but I don't think I think they
so
grew
you
out
just
of
told us that they came from Assyria, that the
yeah,
Assyrians, that the
right,
Assyrians
right. Well, there
brought
are
them.
archaeologists who contend that the Exodus was like 6 people leaving Egypt. So, so I don't trust history at all. And
Okay.
I to be honest with you, I mean, if you can do research and prove me wrong, I love it. I love when people prove me wrong. When I was teaching, I gave students who proved me wrong an A plus.
I'll
So
just jump in. I'll just jump in for a closing thought on the Samaritans here, just to say, back in 2023, we screened at the Bait a film called The Samaritans, A Biblical People. I didn't get to watch it myself, but Professor Stephen Fine was, I think, a consulting academic in the film project. And just coincidence of coincidences, um, for those who are subscribers to the Times of Israel, meaning you pay a monthly fee to be a part of what's called the Times of Israel community, they have this. This is like third year maybe that they're doing something called DocuNation, where they make various documentary films available for viewing over a 1 week period, and they have a Q&A webinar with the director. And this week's documentary is that film, The Samaritans, a Biblical People. So
wow.
if you Google it, you might, I don't know if you're a Times of Israel paid subscriber, you might be able to watch it, or they might have some information about it. More to explore there.
The late Larry Greenfield would call that a God wink,
Yes,
and
yes,
and you know him well.
yes. Is that Sivia with wanting to share a last word before we wrap up? Go ahead.
Yes. Just in terms of the relationship between Moshe and Aaron as brothers,
Yes.
it sort of brings me back to Breshit with Joseph and Yehuda. When Yehuda is willing to make the sacrifice of and stay behind rather than Benjamin, I believe that's Yehuda,
Mm-hmm.
and that's when they become reconciled.
Yes.
But it's interesting here, they both have an important role. So
Yeah.
there's not the same rivalry because they're both given something unique and special to be appreciated for.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a beautiful, beautiful description. I think that's when whether parents or other figures can enable each sibling, child, student, whatever it is, to find their own strength and their own role, then I think competition becomes and tensions become a little bit more softened. So I think that was the vision for Moshe and Aharon. And even still, right, Moshe, part of him might have wanted to be all of them. It was, we're imagining it might have still been difficult to hand this off to Aharon. But those differentiated roles certainly seem like they help. So that's a quick one as we
Okay,
wrap it up.
Samaritans originated from the ancient Hebrews and Israelites, specifically the northern kingdom of Israel. Following the Assyrian conquest in 721 BC,
Right.
they remained in the region of Samaria. They represent a distinct indigenous ethno-religious group, often identified as descendants of the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh.
Great.
Manasseh.
All right. More to research, learn about. Again, let me just double check. I'm pretty sure that our plan from here is to meet next Monday night for those who are able to take a break from your Pesach cleaning. We'll do Parshat Shmini, which will then tide us over because the following Monday night will be Chol HaMoed, through to the following Shabbat. So plan is to meet this coming Monday night, the 30th, and then be off on Chol HaMoed, which is the 6th. But you'll get emails to confirm it. And I'm wishing everyone good luck with your Pesach prep. We're here if you need anything. WhatsApp group to answer questions or be in touch with any of us directly. And for those who are here for Shabbat HaGadol at the Bayit, we have a wonderful Kiddush luncheon in memory of Mendel and Betty Trachtman. So you don't need to make lunch. Come and enjoy at Shul and the Shabbat HaGadol Drasha between Mincha and Marav in person and then reprised on Zoom after Shabbat. I'll be working on that between now and then. So love to Mom and Dad and wonderful night to all. Take care.